rain came down sideways over the docks of Incheon, and Nwosu stood at the edge of a shipping container with a gun pressed to the small of her bag, and 12 years of someone else's secrets burning in the flash drive sewn into her coat lining. She did not cry. That was the first thing the man behind her noticed, and he had noticed many people in many positions like hers. They cried, they begged, they offered money they didn't have, names they shouldn't give, prayers to gods who had long stopped answering. Tara just breathed, slow even, the way her grandmother had taught her to breathe when the asthma came, and the inhaler was empty, and panic was the only thing that could actually kill you. "Turn around," the man said. She turned around, and there he was, Seojin Hwang, the man the city whispered about and never named. The man who owned the cranes that loaded the ships and the customs officers who waved them through, and the police captain who filed the paperwork that made bodies into accidents. He wore a charcoal coat soaked black at the shoulders, and his face. God, his face was the worst part, because it wasn't cruel. It was tired. It was the face of a man who had decided, somewhere along the way, that feeling things was a luxury he could no longer afford. "You're the accountant," he said. Not a question. "I was the accountant," Tara said. "Past tense. I quit 40 minutes ago. The resignation's on the drive, along with everything else." A flicker, almost a smile. "Nobody quits this. I'm black, I'm American, I'm 34 years old, and I have followed every rule every institution ever handed me my entire life," she said, and her voice did not shake, and she would be proud of that later when she replayed it 1,000 times. "And every single one of those rules got me here, to a dock, in the rain, with your gun at my back, so forgive me if I've stopped believing that nobody gets to do anything." The rain hammered the containers like applause. Seojin Hwang looked at this woman, soaked through, jaw set, eyes the color of strong coffee and twice as steady, and he felt something move in his chest that he had buried so deep he'd forgotten its name. "You have something I want," he said quietly. "I have something that could end you," she corrected, "which is different, and the only reason you haven't pulled that trigger is that you don't know who else has a copy." His jaw tightened. She'd guessed right. "So here's what's going to happen," Tara said, and the gun was still on her, and her heart was a war drum, and she had never in her life felt more like she might actually become herself. "You're going to lower the weapon. And then you and I are going to have a conversation about exactly how much trouble we are both in." And Seojin Hwang, who had not lowered a weapon for any human being in 19 years, lowered the weapon. But to understand how Tara ended up here, soaked to the bone on a Korean dock, holding the most dangerous man in Incheon hostage with nothing but a flash drive and her own refusal to break, we need to go back. If you've ever spent years being the dependable one, the one who stays late, who covers the shifts, who sends the money home, who swallows the unfairness because somebody has to keep the peace, then this story is for you. If you've ever looked in the mirror at 30-something and wondered when, exactly, you signed away the right to want things for yourself, this is for you too. Because Tara Nwosu was the good one, the reliable one, the daughter who made it out and never forgot where she came from, and it nearly cost her everything. I want you to think about a question while you listen, and I genuinely want your answer. Drop it in the comments below. Here's the question. What's the difference between being loyal and being used? Because Tara couldn't tell for the longest time, and the moment she finally could see the line between the two is the moment her whole life cracked open. If stories about women who stop shrinking themselves are your kind of thing, do me a favor and hit subscribe right now, because what happens to Tara over the next hour is going to stay with you. Trust me, now. Let's go back 3 years to a small accounting firm in Atlanta and a phone call that changed everything. Before Incheon, before the rain, before a Mafia boss lowered his gun, Tara Nwosu balanced books in a beige office in Atlanta and told herself she was happy. She was good at the telling. She'd had practice. The firm was called Brennan and Wade, and Tara had been there 9 years. She was the senior accountant who wasn't a partner, the one whose name appeared on none of the doors but all of the actual work. When a client's filings were a disaster, they handed it to Tara. When the IRS came calling, they sent Tara into the meeting and took the credit for the outcome. She had cleaned up 4 separate messes that should have ended careers, and her reward was a cost of living raise and a plaque that misspelled her last name. She came in at 7. She left at 8. She knew the building's cleaning crew by their first names: Marisol, Demba, old Mr. Pak, who hummed hymns while he emptied the bins, better than she knew the partners who profited from her. And every 2 weeks, like clockwork, she wired money home. Home was a house in Decatur where her mother, Adaze, sat in a recliner that Tara had paid for, and watched television that Tara had paid for, and lived a life that Tara almost entirely paid for. There was nothing wrong with that. Tara would have told you there was nothing wrong with that, would have told you fiercely, because her mother had raised 3 children alone after Tara's father walked out, had worked 2 jobs, had gone without so her kids could have. Of course Tara sent money home. That was just what you did. That was love. But here is the lie Tara believed, the one underneath all the other lies. She believed that love was a debt, and that the debt could never be paid, and that her job, her entire purpose, was to keep making payments forever. So she did. She paid for her younger brother Chidi's tuition, then his second attempt at tuition after he dropped out the first time, then the business he started that was really just a way to spend her money with extra stems. She paid for her older sister Ngozi's wedding, and Ngozi's divorce, and the apartment Ngozi moved into afterward, and the lawyer when Ngozi decided the divorce hadn't been generous enough. She paid the way other people breathe, automatically, constantly, without noticing she was doing it until the moment she couldn't. "You're the strong one," her mother would say, patting Tara's hand. "I never have to worry about you." And Tara would smile and feel the words land like stones in her stomach, because "I never have to worry about you" meant your needs are invisible to me, and she knew that, even as she refused to know it. She was 31 then. She had not been on a date in 4 years, not because no one asked, but because the last man who'd taken her to dinner had spent the whole evening listening, really listening, and the attention had felt so foreign and so dangerous that she'd canceled the second date and never returned his calls. Being seen, it turned out, was scarier than being used. Used, she understood. Used had a job description. She had $11 and change in her personal savings account, because every other dollar had a destination that wasn't her. She kept a spreadsheet of those destinations. Of course she did, she was an accountant. And the spreadsheet was the only document in her life that told the unvarnished truth. Column A, the obligation. Column B, the amount. Column C, which she'd added in a moment of bleak honesty and then never looked at again. What I told myself it bought: Chidi's tuition, his future, Ngozi's lawyer, family peace, the recliner, Mom's comfort. Row after row of purchases that totaled at the bottom came to a number with 5 figures and a truth she couldn't face, that she had spent years buying a love that should have been free. She had a recurring dream where she stood at the edge of the ocean, trying to fill it with a teaspoon, scooping water from the sand and flinging it back at the sea. And the worst part of the dream was that she kept going. The sea never noticed. Her arm never tired. She never put the spoon down. She would wake from it with her jaw clenched so tight it ached, and she'd lie in the dark and tell herself the dream meant nothing, and she'd get up at 6 and start scooping again. The thing about being the strong one is that everybody loves you for it right up until you stop. Her one extravagance, her one rebellion, was the Korean class she took on Tuesday nights at the community center. It made no sense. Nobody in her family was Korean. She had no business reason for it. She'd wandered into it almost by accident, after a Korean film made her cry in a way she didn't understand. And she kept going because for 90 minutes a week, in a room full of strangers conjugating verbs, nobody needed anything from her. She was just a student, a beginner, allowed to be bad at something, allowed to simply want to learn a thing for no reason but the wanting. She didn't know yet that those Tuesday nights would save her life. Her supervisor, a partner named Greg Wade, called her into his office on a Thursday in October. Tara assumed it was about the Hartley account. It was not. "We've got an opportunity," Greg said, leaning back in his chair, fingers tented. "International client. Big one. Shipping conglomerate out of South Korea. Opening a U.S. subsidiary. Needs someone to handle the books on the ground over there for the transition. 6 months, maybe a year. Housing covered. Premium per diem. The works." Tara's heart did something complicated. Korea. The word she practiced on Tuesday nights, suddenly real. "Why me?" she asked, because 9 years had taught her to be suspicious of good news. Greg smiled the smile that never reached his eyes. "Because you're the best we've got, Tara. And because the client was very specific. They wanted someone meticulous, someone who doesn't ask too many questions about things that aren't her business." He slid a folder across the desk. "The pay is triple your salary." Triple? You could send a lot home with that. And there it was, the magic words. You could send a lot home. He knew exactly which string to pull. They always did. She should have asked more questions. She knew that later. She should have asked why a shipping conglomerate needed an external accountant who didn't ask questions. Should have wondered why the salary was triple. Should have noticed that Greg couldn't quite look at her when he said the company's name. But she was so tired of teaspoons. And here, finally, was an ocean she might actually move. "I'll do it," she said. When she told her mother, Adie's didn't ask if Tara was excited or scared or what the work would be. She asked, "How much more can you send?" Tara remembered the exact moment she'd hoped for something different. She'd driven to Decatur to deliver the news in person, had stopped on the way to buy her mother's favorite cake from the bakery on Candler Road, had rehearsed in the car how she'd describe Korea, the language she'd been quietly studying, the way the whole thing felt like a door opening after years in a hallway. She'd wanted, just once, for her mother to be happy for her, instead of happy about what she could provide. She'd set the cake on the counter and started to talk, and she'd gotten 4 sentences in. "It's in Korea, Mom. Can you believe it? I've been taking the language and now I actually get to—" Before Adie's interrupted with the question about the money. The cake sat untouched. Tara drove home and didn't cry, because she'd long ago trained herself out of crying about this particular thing. But she sat in her car in her own driveway for 40 minutes before she could make herself go inside. She packed her life into 2 suitcases and flew to Incheon believing she was going to fix a company's books. She had no idea she was being delivered into the heart of a war. But the moment her plane touched down on that gray runway, something in her chest unclenched for the first time in years, and a quiet, dangerous voice inside her whispered, "What if you didn't go back?" The company was called Daejin Logistics, and on paper it was beautiful. Tara fell in love with the books before she fell in love with anything else, because the books were clean, suspiciously clean. In 9 years, she'd developed an instinct for numbers the way a sommelier develops a nose for wine, and Daejin's ledgers had the particular flawlessness of a room that has been wiped down by someone who knew exactly where the fingerprints would be. Her office was on the 11th floor of a glass tower overlooking the port, and from her window she could watch the cranes move containers like a child stacking blocks. Her assistant was a nervous young man named Minho, who flinched whenever the elevator dinged. Her direct supervisor, the CFO, was a polished woman named Yuna Bayek, who wore suits that cost more than Tara's monthly salary back home, and who answered every question with a smile and almost no information. For the first 3 weeks, Tara did her job and asked nothing. Then she found the 13th account. It wasn't hidden exactly. That was what made it brilliant. It was labeled Maritime Insurance Reserve, Contingency, and money flowed into it from the regular operating accounts in amounts that were always just under the threshold that would trigger an automatic audit flag. 49,000 here, 48.5 there, hundreds of transactions. And the money flowed out to a web of shell entities with names like Blue Harbor Holdings and Star of the East Trading, entities that, when Tara dug, turned out to own nothing, employ no one, and exist only as mouths to receive money and pass it onward into darkness. She was looking at a laundromat, a very large, very sophisticated laundromat for very dirty money, and that was the day she met him. She'd stayed late, of course she always stayed late, and the building had gone quiet, and she was standing at the floor-to-ceiling window with a cup of cold tea, staring at the cranes, trying to decide whether the thing she'd found was the kind of thing you reported or the kind of thing that reported you. The 11th floor had emptied hours ago. Even Minho had gone, leaving with his usual nervous half-bow and a glance at the elevator that she hadn't yet learned to read. The only light was the blue glow of her monitor and the orange wash of the port lamps far below. When the elevator dinged, she expected the cleaning crew. Instead, a man stepped out, and the air in the room changed. He was tall, broad through the shoulders, dressed in a dark coat that he wore the way other men wore their own skin. His hair was black going silver at the temples. He moved without sound. And when his eyes found her standing alone in the dark office, he stopped. Not startled exactly, but recalibrating, like a predator that had expected an empty room and found something living in it. "You're working late," he said in English. His voice was low and unhurried. "So are you," Tara said. "And I don't believe we've met. I'm the new Tara Nwosu, Senior Accountant, Contract Atlanta. 34, no dependents listed, though you wire 40% of your income to an address in Decatur, Georgia." He said it without menace, simply reciting, the way you'd read a weather report. "You take a Korean language class on Tuesdays, or you did before you came here." The cold tea trembled in her hand. "You read my file." "I read everyone's file." He crossed the room slowly, stopped at a respectful distance, and looked out at the cranes beside her. Up close he smelled of rain and cedar and something darker underneath. "I am Seojin Hwang. Daejin is mine." Now Tara knew the org chart of Daejin Logistics. She'd memorized it her first week, and the name at the top, the CEO, the chairman, the owner of record, was not Seojin Hwang. It was a man named Park Do-yoon, 68 years old, who appeared at ribbon cuttings and signed the documents. "Daejin belongs to Park Do-yoon," she said carefully. "Park Do-yoon belongs to me," Seojin said, and there it was, the truth sliding into place like a key into a lock. "Mr. Park is a face, a good face. He shakes the hands and bows at the funerals. But the company is mine. The port is mine. The men who load those ships are mine." He turned to look at her, and his eyes were not cruel, were not even cold, were something far more dangerous. They were curious. "I think you already know this. I think you found something tonight. Your screen is still on. Account 13. The blood left Tara's face. I wasn't." "Don't," he said almost gently. "Don't lie. You're terrible at it. It's the most interesting thing about you." He studied her for a long moment, and Tara had the sensation of being read the way she read ledgers. Every entry, every adjustment, every place the numbers didn't add up. Most people, when they find what you found, they do one of three things. They run, they steal, or they go to the police, which is the same as running but slower. He tilted his head. "Which are you?" And Tara, exhausted, frightened, 3 years and an ocean away from the teaspoon and the recliner, and the family that loved her for everything except who she actually was, heard herself say something true. "I don't know yet," she said, "but I'm not going to pretend I didn't see it. I've spent my whole life pretending I didn't see things. I'm done." Something shifted in Seojin Hwang's face. Surprise, maybe, or recognition. He looked at her the way you look at a person who has just turned out to be made of sturdier material than the situation called for. "Go home, Ms. Nwosu," he said finally. "Sleep. Tomorrow, come to my office on the top floor at 9. We're going to talk about your future." He walked back toward the elevator, then paused. "And, Ms. Nwosu, don't fall in love with me. Everyone who gets close to me ends up paying for it. I've buried enough good people." The elevator doors closed on him, and Tara stood alone in the dark, heart pounding, holding a cup of cold tea and the dawning, terrible realization that the cleanest book she'd ever seen belonged to the dirtiest man in the city, and that she had just been invited into the machine. She almost ran. She packed her suitcase that very night, sat on the edge of the hotel bed at 3 a.m. with her passport in her hand, and almost ran. She didn't. And the reason she didn't is the reason everything that came after happened the way it did. At 9 the next morning, she rode the elevator to the top floor. Seojin's office was glass and gray stone, sparse as a monastery, with a single orchid on the desk and a wall of windows that made the whole port look like a model someone had built to be admired. He poured her tea, real tea, hot this time, and sat across from her and told her the truth, or part of it, the part that turned her blood to ice. "The money in account 13 isn't mine," he said. "Not the way you think. I move it. I clean it. But it belongs to a man named Baek Cheol-min." He let the name sit. Yoona Baek's father. Tara thought of the polished CFO, her bottomless smiles, her empty answers. Yoona's father owns the dirty money. Yoona's father owns everything dirty in 3 provinces. Drugs, weapons, people. His jaw worked. He's not a businessman who breaks the law. He's a wound that the law grew around. And 11 years ago, when I was younger and stupider and thought I could climb out of the gutter by being useful to the right monster, I went to work for him. I built him this. He gestured at the window, the port, the cranes. The cleanest laundering operation in East Asia. I made him untouchable. And now? And now I want out. And there is no out. Not from him. He looked at her, and for the first time she saw the tiredness underneath the control, the exhaustion of a man holding a door shut against something on the other side. 6 months ago I started keeping records. Real records. Everything. The real flows, the real names, the politicians, the cops, the judges. A confession and a weapon, both. Enough to bring the whole structure down, including me. I told myself I'd use it when the time was right. A bitter half-smile. But Beck found out I was keeping books he couldn't see, so he sent me an accountant. The tea went cold in Tara's hands for the second time in 2 days. "He sent you, Ms. Nwosu," Seojin said softly. "Through your firm, through Greg Wade, who owes Bayek's American partners a great deal of money. You weren't hired to manage a subsidiary. You were hired to find my hidden records and report them back to Bayek. You're a hunting dog. You just didn't know you were holding the leash from the wrong end." The room tilted. Tara set the tea down before she dropped it. Greg's smile, someone who doesn't ask too many questions, the triple salary, the way nobody had been able to look at her. "I didn't know," she said. Her voice came out thin. "I swear to you, I didn't." "I know you didn't," Seojin said. "If you had, you'd be a much better liar. Mac chose you because you're brilliant and desperate and disposable. A foreign contractor with no one here to ask questions if you disappear. He chose you because when this is over, you'll be the one holding the dirty ledgers, the American accountant, the outsider, the perfect person to blame." He leaned forward. "He's building a fall, and you're the body that's supposed to be at the bottom of it." Tara had spent her whole life being the one things landed on, the one who absorbed other people's failures so the people she loved could keep walking. And now she understood that she had crossed an ocean, escaped one set of people who used her up, only to be purchased like cargo, like one of the containers in the yard below, and shipped to the other side of the world to be used up there. The conflict was no longer about whether to report a crime. It was about whether she would live. "How long do I have?" she asked. "Before Beck expects results? A few weeks?" "Before he stops being patient?" Seojin spread his hands. "That depends entirely on what you do next." Outside, far below, a crane lifted a container into the air and held it there, swaying, suspended over the water. And Tara watched it and thought, "That's me. That's exactly me." "So those are my choices," Tara said. "Help Beck bury you, and then have Beck bury me. Or run, and have Beck find me, because men like that always find people. Is that the whole menu?" "There's a third thing," Seojin said. "Of course there is. You could help me destroy him first." She laughed, a sharp, disbelieving sound that surprised them both. "I'm an accountant, Mr. Huang. I reconcile bank statements. I don't bring down crime lords." "No," he agreed. "But you found account 13 in 3 weeks when Beck's own people have never traced my records in 6 months. You see money the way other people see faces." And what I have is a confession with no shape. Thousands of transactions, hundreds of entities. A story so complicated no prosecutor could ever follow it. He stood and walked to the window. I don't need a soldier, Ms. Nwosu. I have soldiers. I need someone who can take an ocean of dirty money and turn it into a single, undeniable line that even a frightened judge can read. I need an accountant who isn't afraid. I'm extremely afraid. Afraid, he said, is not the same as obedient. I've watched a great many obedient people. You're the first afraid one I've wanted to bet on. He laid it out then, honestly, which she would remember as the strangest part, that this man whose entire empire was built on deception told her the truth so plainly. Oh, if she helped him, here was what it bought her. He had a contact, a prosecutor in Seoul named Han Ji-won, clean as far as anyone could be clean, who had been quietly building a case against Beck for 2 years and getting nowhere because the financial trail was a labyrinth. Seojin could deliver Tara to Han Ji-won as a cooperating witness. Immunity, protection, a new life. But only if the evidence she helped assemble was airtight enough to take Beck down in a single swift cut, because anything less than total would mean Beck survived, and a surviving Beck would kill every person who'd touched the case. Here is what I will not do, Seojin said. I will not pretend this is safe. If you say yes, there is a real chance you die. I've buried people who knew less and were more careful than you'll have to be. I told you not to fall in love with me, but the truth is uglier than that. You shouldn't trust me at all. I am not a good man. I have done things that should have damned me 100 times over. The only thing I can promise is that for the first time in 11 years, my interest and your interest point in the same direction. That's not friendship. That's not safety. It's just alignment. But it's real, and it's more than Bayek will ever offer you. Tara thought about her mother's hand patting hers. I never have to worry about you. She thought about Greg's smile. She thought about every institution that had handed her a rule and then handed her the bill. She thought about being suspended over the water, swaying, waiting for someone to decide where she'd be set down. What are the terms? She asked. If I'm going to be a criminal's partner, I want terms. In writing? Well, not in writing, obviously, but spoken, agreed, clear. I've spent my whole life on handshake deals where I did all the giving. Not this time. A real smile crossed Seojin's face then, the first one, and it transformed him entirely. Name them. 1. We're partners, not boss and dog. You don't read my file again. You don't track me. You don't manage me. Information flows both ways, or it doesn't flow. Agreed. 2. When this is over, if I'm alive, I walk away clean. Immunity isn't a favor you hold over me. It's part of the deal, locked in from the start with this Han Ji-won, before I touch a single document for you. I'll arrange the meeting this week. 3. Her voice steadied as she went, each demand a brick she was laying down for the woman she was about to become. You stop trying to scare me off. I heard you. Don't fall in love with you. People who get close to you pay for it. I'm not close to you. I'm working with you, and I make my own decisions about what I'm willing to pay. I'm 34 years old, and I'm done with people deciding what I can handle, including you. Seojin was quiet for a long moment. Then he inclined his head, not a nod, something closer to a bow. Agreed, all of it. Then we have a deal. She extended her hand. He took it. His grip was warm and dry and certain, and something passed between them that neither of them named, because naming it would have made it a liability, and they had enough of those. One more thing, he said, not letting go of her hand. You should know. Beck has a daughter inside this company who reports to him daily. Yuna. She likes you. She'll get closer. Everything you say to her, he hears within the hour. So, from this moment, you live 2 lives. The accountant Bayek thinks he bought, and the one building the knife. If you slip even once... I won't slip, Tara said. And the woman who had spent 34 years being exactly who everyone needed her to be discovered, in that glass office above the gray water, that she had a remarkable talent for becoming someone new. The first thing she did was the hardest, and it had nothing to do with Bayek. She called her mother. It was evening in Incheon, morning in Decatur, and Adaze answered on the fourth ring with the television loud behind her. "Tara, good. I was going to call you. The roof, the man came and looked at the roof. He says it's $8,000. Can you believe?" "Mom." Tara closed her eyes. Her hand was shaking. "Mom, I need you to listen to me, and I need you to not interrupt, okay? Just this once." A pause. The television lowered. "What's wrong? Are you sick?" "I'm fine. Physically I'm fine. But I'm not going to be able to send money for a while. Maybe a long while." The silence on the line had texture. "What do you mean? You said the salary was triple." "I know what I said. Things have changed. I can't explain all of it. And I need you to trust me that it's serious. I need to keep what I have. For myself. For emergencies." "What emergencies?" "Tara, your brother's business. The launch is next month. He's counting on—" "Chidi's business doesn't exist, Mom." The words came out flat and clean, and saying them was like setting down something she'd carried so long, she'd forgotten it had weight. "It's never existed. It's a way to spend my money and call it investment. We both know that. You know that." "How can you say that about your brother?" "Because it's true, and I've spent 9 years pretending it isn't, and I can't afford to pretend anymore. Literally, I cannot afford it." Her voice cracked and she let it. "Mom, I love you. I will always love you. But I'm 34 years old and I have $11 in my own savings account, and every time something happens to me, the first thing anyone in this family asks is how it affects what I can give. Not whether I'm okay, what I can give. And I am telling you, right now, gently as I can, that part is over. I'm still your daughter. I'm just not your bank anymore." Adaze hung up on her. Tara sat on the edge of her hotel bed and shook for 10 minutes, and the guilt was an animal in her chest, and 3 different times she nearly called back to apologize, to take it all back, to wire the $8,000 for the roof she'd never see. She didn't. She let the animal claw, and she breathed the way her grandmother taught her, slow and even, until it tired itself out. It was the first boundary she'd ever set with her family in her life. And the strange thing, the thing nobody warns you about, was that underneath the guilt, so quiet she almost missed it, was relief so vast it frightened her. If you've ever had to say no to someone you love because saying yes was killing you, I want you to drop a single word in the comments right now. Just write, boundary. I want to see how many of us there are, because I promise you, you are not alone, and you are not the villain in your own story for finally choosing yourself. Now, back to the war. The work was painstaking and terrifying. By day, Tara was the diligent contractor, smiling at Una Beck over lunch, feeding her exactly the harmless updates a hunting dog was supposed to feed its handler. The integration's going well. The books are complex. I think I've found some irregularities I'm still mapping. Each word calibrated to keep Beck patient, to make him believe his dog was on the scent of Seojin's hidden records and closing in. By night, in a safe house Seojin kept above a nori bang in a part of the city that didn't have cameras, she built the knife. The room smelled of old cigarette smoke and the faint sweetness of the karaoke bar below, and through the floor, muffled, came the sound of strangers singing love songs badly into the small hours. She'd come to find it comforting, that sound, proof that somewhere below her, ordinary people were having ordinary, ridiculous nights, while she stitched together the case that would either free her or kill her. And God, the knife was beautiful. Seojin gave her everything, his real ledgers, the ones that mapped Bayek's empire transaction by transaction. But raw, they were chaos. 11 years of money moving through 900 entities across 14 jurisdictions, deliberately fractured so no single thread could be followed. Tara's gift, the thing 9 years at Brennan and Wade had honed without her noticing, was that she could see the structure beneath the chaos. She built a model. She traced every shell to its owner, every owner to its beneficiary, collapsed the 900 entities down to the 11 that mattered, then down to the 3 that Beck actually controlled, then down to the single account where, twice a year, All of it surfaced for one breathtaking moment before it dove again. The choke point. The place where the whole laundry passed through one needle's eye that led directly, undeniably, to Baek Cheolmin's own hand. "He thinks the complexity protects him," she told Seojin one night. The two of them bent over a laptop in the dim room, close enough that she could smell the cedar and rain of him. "But complexity is just a lot of simple things stacked up. You take it apart one layer at a time, and eventually you find the floor. Everyone's standing on a floor." Seojin looked at her, not the way men usually looked at her, assessing her usefulness, but the way you look at something rare. "Where were you?" he said quietly. 11 years ago? "Atlanta, being someone's hunting dog and not knowing it." She didn't look up from the screen. "Same as now. I just changed handlers." "No," he said. "You didn't. That's the difference. You don't have a handler anymore, Tara. You have a partner." It was the first time he'd used her first name, and it landed in the small dim room and stayed there, warm between them. She finally looked up. He was very close. The thing they hadn't named pressed against the silence. And then her phone buzzed. Yuna Bayek, a text. "Dinner tomorrow? My father is in town. He'd love to finally meet the famous American accountant." The choke point of Tara's own life narrowed to a single needle's eye. Beck was coming, and he wanted to look his hunting dog in the eyes. The dinner was at a private room in a restaurant where the fish was still moving, and the bill would have covered Tara's mother's roof 4 times over. Baek Cheolmin was not what she expected. She'd built a monster in her mind, and instead a small, neat, grandfatherly man rose to greet her, took her hand in both of his, and told her in careful English what an honor it was, how Yuna spoke of nothing but her brilliance. He had kind eyes. That was the worst thing about him. He had the kindest eyes she'd ever seen on a human being, and she knew, watching them crinkle as he smiled, that he had ordered the deaths of people whose names he'd never bothered to learn. She played her part. She was modest, diligent, a little overwhelmed by his generosity. She talked about the integration. She let him steer. And then, over the 3rd course, he stopped pretending. "You've been with us almost 2 months now," Baek said, his English soft, his eyes still kind. "Tell me, Ms. Nwosu, have you found everything you were looking for in our books?" "The slightest weight on everything." "I have a particular interest. There are certain records, kept by a certain trusted associate of mine, that I have been unable to locate. Records that don't appear in the official systems. I had hoped that someone with your gifts might, in the course of her work, happen upon them." There it was, the leash yanked. He was telling her in front of his daughter, in the politest possible language, "You were bought to find Seojin's hidden books. Have you found them? Produce them." Tara felt the entire arc of her life balance on the point of a knife. One wrong word and she was a body at the bottom of a fall. She thought of the crane, the container, the swaying. She thought of her grandmother's breath, slow and even. And then she did the bravest thing she had ever done. She told the truth, sideways. "Mr. Buck," she said, setting down her chopsticks, meeting those kind and terrible eyes. "I'll be honest with you, because I think you're a man who values honesty." A breath. "I have found irregularities, significant ones. A second set of records, hidden, exactly as you suspected, kept by someone inside Daejin who was stealing from the operation and concealing it." She let the words land. "I haven't reported it because I wanted to be certain before I named anyone. But I'm close. Another 2 weeks and I'll be able to hand you the complete picture. Names, amounts, methods, everything." It was perfect, because it was true and false at once. There was a second set of records. Someone was about to be destroyed by them. She simply let Beck believe the target was Seojin, when the records she was building pointed at no one but Beck himself. The kind eyes warmed. He had heard exactly what he wanted to hear. His dog was loyal, his dog was close, his enemy was nearly in his hands. 2 weeks, he said, pleased. "Excellent. You see, Yuna? I told you she was worth the price." He patted Tara's hand the same way her mother did. "Take your time. Be certain. And Ms. Nwosu, when you deliver this person to me, You'll find I am very, very generous to those who are loyal." "I'm counting on it," Tara said, and smiled, and meant something he could never have understood. She didn't slip, not once. And as she rode home in the car Beck had sent, she realized her hands weren't even shaking anymore. The 2 weeks became the longest of her life. She and Seojun moved the evidence in pieces, copied and recopied, distributed to 3 locations so that no single raid could destroy it. Prosecutor Han Ji-won met her once, in the back of a laundromat in Seoul. The irony was not lost on either of them, and read 3 pages of Tara's analysis, and went very pale and very quiet, and then said the words Tara would remember forever. "In 2 years of trying, no one has ever made this man's money make sense. You've made it make sense in a way I can take to a courtroom. Ms. Nwosu, do you understand what you've built?" "A floor," Tara said. "Everyone's standing on one? I just found his." On the 14th day, instead of delivering Seojun's name to Bayek, Tara delivered everything to Han Ji-won, and the prosecutor moved. They arrested Bayek Cheolmin at 6 in the morning at his home in the hills above the city, and they did it on a Thursday, and Tara watched it on the news in the safe house with Seojun standing silent beside her. It should have felt like victory. It felt like the held breath before one, because Beck did not go quietly into the machine. Men like Bayek had spent their whole lives learning that the machine could be bought, and from his cell he reached out with everything he had left. The case would go to trial fast, Han Ji-won insisted, knowing every day Beck stayed connected was a day he might wriggle free. And in those weeks, 3 things happened that nearly ended everything. First, Yuna Beck vanished from the company and resurfaced as her father's avenging angel, and she knew Tara had been there at the end, and she began, methodically, to pull at the thread of the American accountant. Second, Greg Wade, back in Atlanta, Greg, who had sold Tara into this for a debt, got frightened, and frightened men talk, and word reached Beck's people that the dog might have been working both ends. And third, and worst, a man came for Tara on the docks. That's where the rain was. That's where the story began. Tara at the edge of a shipping container with everything sewn into her coat, because she'd been moving the last copy of the evidence to Han Ji-won herself, refusing to trust it to anyone, when Bayek's men intercepted her, and Seojun came alone because there was no time to bring anyone, and a gun ended up at the small of Tara's bag. You know how that scene ends. He lowered the weapon, not for himself, for her, and the 2 of them talked their way off that dock alive, because Tara, even with a gun on her, was the only person in the equation thinking 3 moves ahead. You don't know who else has a copy. She'd made sure of that. The accountant's final defense, redundancy. So now you know how she got there, and now I can tell you how it ended. Beck went to trial, and Tara Nwosu walked into a Seoul courtroom under the protection of the state, and testified. She sat in the witness box for 2 full days. Yuna Bayek's lawyers, the most expensive in the country, came at her with everything. They called her a thief, a foreign opportunist, a jilted associate of the real criminal, Seojun Hwang. They put up charts of their own, designed to confuse, to muddy, to drown the truth in complexity. They projected a tangle of 900 entities onto the courtroom wall, a deliberate spiderweb, and the lead lawyer gestured at it grandly and asked the jury whether any reasonable person could believe a single contract accountant had untangled something this vast, or whether, and here he turned to Tara with theatrical pity, she'd simply invented a story and worked backward to fit it. And Tara, calm as still water, took their complexity apart 1 layer at a time, the way she'd promised. She asked the court's permission to approach the projected web. She did it without notes. "This looks like 900 companies," she said, and she touched the wall. "But watch what happens when you ask each one a single question. Who actually receives the money in the end?" 1 by 1, she grouped them. The web collapsed. 900 became 11 holding structures. 11 became 3 controllers, and 3 became 1. 1 account, 1 signatory, twice a year, for 11 years, where the entire ocean of laundered money surfaced for a single breath before diving again. She circled the name on the wall with her finger. Beck Cheolmin. his own hand on the needle's eye. The courtroom was silent. One of the jurors, an older woman in the back row, put her hand over her mouth. The lead defense lawyer tried to rattle her then, abandoning the charts. He asked sneeringly what qualified a small-time American bookkeeper to understand the finances of an international enterprise. He asked whether she'd ever testified before. He asked whether it was true she'd been hired by Mr. Beck's own organization. Wasn't she, in fact, his employee? And wasn't this whole performance the revenge of a contractor who hadn't been paid enough? Tara waited until he finished. She'd learned, somewhere in the last 2 years, the power of not rushing to fill a silence. She looked at him, and then she looked at Bayek, who was no longer smiling, whose kind eyes had finally gone cold and afraid. 9 years of cleaning up other people's messes, she said clearly. I'm very good at finding the things someone hoped no one would look at. Mr. Bayek hoped no one would look at him. He was wrong. The verdict took the jury 4 hours. Guilty, on all counts. Money laundering, racketeering, conspiracy. And when the financial evidence cracked his organization open, and his lieutenants began trading testimony for mercy, far worse. Beck Chelman, the wound the law had grown around, was sentenced to a number of years that meant he would die inside a prison. The kind eyes would close in a cell. In the gallery, Una Beck stared at Tara with pure hatred, and Tara held her gaze without flinching, and felt no triumph, only a deep and steady certainty. Outside the courthouse, Han Ji-won shook her hand on the steps in front of the cameras. You did something today that 2 years of police work couldn't, she said. I don't think you understand yet what you are. I'm an accountant, Tara said. You're the most dangerous accountant I've ever met, Han Ji-won said, and I mean that as the highest compliment I have. Here is the part of the story that nobody films, because it isn't dramatic, but it's the part that mattered most. After the trial, the noise died down, and Tara Nwosu was suddenly free, and entirely without a self. She had immunity. She had her name cleared quietly in the records that mattered. She had the gratitude of a sole prosecutor, and the strange, careful regard of a man who used to be a Mafia boss. What she did not have was any idea who she was when no one needed her for anything. That terrified her more than Beck ever had. So she did something that 2 years earlier would have been unthinkable. She stayed in Korea. Not for Seo-jun. She was careful about that, careful with herself. She stayed because for the first time in her life, she got to choose where her body lived, and she chose the gray port city where she had finally become real. And then she built a life out of the one thing that had always been hers, the work. Han Ji-won made the introduction. There was demand, it turned out, enormous demand, for someone who could do what Tara did, who could take the deliberately incomprehensible finances of corrupt institutions and make them make sense. NGOs chasing stolen development funds, journalists tracing oligarchs' yachts back to looted treasuries, a government anti-corruption unit that had more dirty money than analysts who could read it. Tara opened a one-woman forensic accounting practice in a small office that she paid for herself, with a sign on the door that said her name, spelled correctly. She called it Nwosu Forensic. She set her own rates, which were high, because she had finally learned that the strong one is allowed to be expensive. She turned down the clients she didn't believe in. She took the ones who were trying to find the floor that someone powerful was standing on. Within a year, she had a waiting list. Within 18 months, she had hired Minho, the nervous assistant from Daejeon, who, it turned out, had only flinched at the elevator because he'd known what kind of company he worked for, and had been too frightened to leave. She trained him. She paid him well. She watched him stop flinching. She opened a personal savings account and watched the number in it grow past $11, past 1,000, past a number she'd never imagined attaching to her own name, and she did not wire it anywhere. The first month, the balance crossed $10,000, money that was hers, owed to no one, promised to no one. She sat at her kitchen table and looked at the figure on her phone for a long time, and then she did something she'd never once done in 36 years. She transferred a small amount into a second account and labeled it, in the banking app, for nothing in particular. A fund with no destination, no obligation in column A, just hers, to spend on a whim or never spend at all. It was the most radical financial act of her life, and it cost less than her mother's old electricity bill. She bought a small apartment with a window that looked at the water. She bought a coat that wasn't practical, a deep wine-colored wool thing that did nothing useful, and made her feel, when she caught her reflection in shop windows, like a woman who belonged to herself. She took a Korean class again, an advanced one now, on Tuesday nights, and sometimes the teacher asked her to help the beginners, and she did. And she remembered the woman who'd wandered into a community center because a film had made her cry, and she felt tender toward that woman and proud of her and free of her. Her brother Chidi called once, 8 months in, when he heard through the family that Tara had money again. He had a new business, an opportunity. He just needed a little capital to— "No," Tara said. Just that. No explanation, no apology, no softening. She'd practiced. The word came out clean. "No, Chidi, but I love you, and I hope it works out." And she hung up, and she did not shake afterward, and that was how she knew she was healed. Not because saying no was easy. Because it no longer cost her anything she couldn't afford. The money she'd once measured her worth by, she finally understood it had never been the point. The point was the thing she'd traded it for year after year, the right to be needed, because she didn't believe she had any right to simply be loved. She'd had it backwards her whole life. You don't earn love by being useful. You let yourself be loved, and then, if you choose, you're useful. Out of fullness, not fear. She earned a certification that made her, on paper, one of fewer than 200 forensic accountants in the world qualified to do what she did. She framed it. She hung it next to the window with the water. It was hers, all of it, built on no one's merit but her own. Seojun Hwang did not become a good man overnight, because that isn't how it works, and Tara would have distrusted it if he had. What he did was turn himself in. Not to the police. Han Ji-won had quietly used his cooperation to keep him out of a cell, a deal Tara had insisted on as fiercely as she'd insisted on her own immunity, because partnership meant partnership. He turned himself in to the truth of what he'd been. He testified fully against the structure he'd built. He surrendered the assets that could be traced to Bayek's operation, which was most of them. He kept Daejin's legitimate logistics business. The cranes really did load real ships. And he spent the next 2 years scrubbing it clean for actual, not for show, until the books were honest in a way that, for once, would survive Tara looking at them. They did not fall into each other's arms. He'd told her not to fall in love with him, and she'd told him she'd make her own decisions. And what they'd built instead, slowly in the months and years after the trial, was the thing that mattered more than falling. They became people who could stand. He came to her office sometimes. She let him see the work. He brought her cases. Corruption he'd glimpsed from the inside that no one else could see. They argued about money the way other people argue about art, with passion and respect and the deep pleasure of being understood by someone fluent in your private language. And slowly, in the spaces between the work, they traded the things they'd never told anyone. He told her about the brother he'd lost at 19, the debt that had pushed him toward Bayek in the first place, the particular shame of having built something brilliant in service of something evil. She told him about the spreadsheet with column C, about the teaspoon dream, about the cake that sat untouched on her mother's counter. They were not gentle confessions. They didn't comfort each other so much as witness each other, which, Tara was learning, was the rarer and more valuable thing. He never once told her she'd been foolish to give so much. She never once told him he'd been a monster to do what he'd done. They simply let each other be the whole, complicated, damaged truth, without flinching, and in the not flinching something grew that neither of them had a word for. And one evening, a little over 2 years after the rain on the docks, Seojun stood at the window of her small office, looking at the water, and said the thing he'd been holding for a long time. "I told you not to fall in love with me," he said, "because everyone who got close to me paid for it. I'd buried so many people." He turned. The tiredness she'd seen that first night was gone, or mostly gone, replaced by something steadier. "But you didn't pay. You took the most dangerous thing in my life and you turned it into the thing that set us both free. You didn't fall, Tara. You climbed. And somewhere in there I stopped being able to imagine the work, or the days, or any of it, without you." He took a breath, And this man who had run an empire looked for a moment like a nervous boy. "I fell first. I fell harder. And I'm fairly sure I'm going to fall forever. So I'm not asking you to fall. I'm asking you to stand next to me, as equals, for as long as you want to." Tara looked at him for a long moment. "Here are my terms," she said. And he laughed, the real laugh, the one that transformed him. Because of course she had terms. She always had terms. And the having of terms was the whole reason he loved her. "Name them," he said. 1. We're partners. We've always been partners. That doesn't change because the word does. Agreed. 2. I keep my practice, my name on my door, my clients, my rates, my no's. I am not absorbing into anything ever again, not even something good. I'd never let you. I like your nose too much. 3. Her voice softened just slightly, the brick laid gently this time. You don't get to protect me by deciding things for me. Not ever. We're honest, or we're nothing. Information flows both ways. It always has, he said. It's the only relationship I've ever had where it did. She crossed the room and stood next to him at the window, the water gray and endless below, the cranes moving their containers in the failing light. She did not take his hand right away. She let them stand there, two people who had each spent their lives being used by the other people who claimed to love them, and who had found, improbably, on a dock in the rain, the one other person who saw them clearly and wanted them anyway. Then she took his hand, warm, dry, certain. Then we have a deal, she said. It wasn't a fairy tale. There was no rescue, no white horse, no man who swept in and fixed her life. There were two damaged people who chose, every day, to keep choosing each other as equals, which is better, which is the only kind of love that actually holds. So here's the question I asked you at the beginning. What's the difference between being loyal and being used? Nwosu learned the answer the hard way. Loyalty flows both ways. The moment it only flows one way, the moment your value to the people around you is measured entirely by what you give and never by who you are, that's not loyalty anymore. That's just being used by people who've taught you to call it love. She crossed an ocean to escape one set of people who used her up, and walked straight into the arms of a man who tried to buy her like cargo and bury her at the bottom of his crimes. And she could have broken. By every rule of every institution that ever handed her a bill, she should have broken. Instead, she found the floor that the most powerful man in the room was standing on, and she pulled it out from under him. She set a boundary with her family and survived the guilt. She built a name and a business and a savings account that were hers alone. And she learned the thing it takes some of us our whole lives to learn, that you don't have to earn the right to exist. You're allowed to simply want things, to say no, to be expensive, to be loved for who you are and not just what you provide. She didn't get a fairy tale ending. She got something better. She got herself back. If this story moved you, if you saw even a little of yourself in Tara, in the teaspoon and the ocean, in the phone call that finally said no, then do 3 things for me before you go. Drop a comment and tell me about a boundary you set that changed your life, because I read them, and so does everyone scrolling past, and somebody out there needs to hear they're not alone tonight. Share this with the person in your life who's been the strong one for too long, and subscribe, because every week we tell stories about people who stopped shrinking themselves and started standing up. Tara's standing at her window right now, in a city she chose, next to a man who sees her with her name spelled correctly on the door. The teaspoon's gone. She finally put it down.